Motherfucker! Motherfucker!
What happened? What happened? Nothing happened this morning, you know that?
Were you in here?
No.
So then nothing happened to you this morning?
Yeah, you're right. I just woke up and you were so sweet and nice. We were not even fighting this morning. All I did was say sorry.
Did something happen to you this morning? I don't think so.
No, that's the thing.
You want to see crazy? I'll give you fucking crazy. That's crazy. Oh, you're crazy. Oh, you're crazy.
Have you drunk this whole thing this morning?
Oh, you got this going. You got this going?
I just started it.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Really? Sneak that shit on me, motherfucker.
I didn't. You were smashing shit.
Oh, bye.
You see Miss Her laughing in that? She's not laughing in that. Mr. Depp in this courtroom right now is laughing and making snide remarks as that video is being played. But it's not a laughing matter. Who does that? Who does that? Imagine being in Amber's shoes on February 10th, 2016, videotaping him because when he's sober and sweet, you've never. But when he mixes the drugs and he mixes drinks, he turns into this man. You've seen it before. You're praying it won't happen again, but deep down, you know it will. You know that that man will come out. and influencers on social media. And you saw that text. That's how he injected himself into this trial. There was way more than $62 of damage. You heard testimony from Rocky Pennington, Whitney Enriquez, and Amber about him trashing the trailer. And is that really a surprise? The man's admitted that he smashes things when he gets angry. The man's admitted that he's smashed hotel rooms. You saw the quote that he admitted to the other day, that when he wants to hit something, he's going to hit it, and he doesn't care about the repercussions. So in Hicksville, the Hicksville was late May 2013. This is a text, another text to drug buddy Bettany, where he says, I, of course, pounded and displayed ugly colors to Amber on recent journey. I am an insane person and not so fair-headed after too much of the drink. Weed, pills, fine. Booze, my capacity is too large and I won't stop. Ugly and sad. Oh, how I love it.
Can I refer to my report to see if that specific number?
Okay. People are getting it, I guess, on their phones that haven't silenced that.
Oh, okay, Your Honor.
Okay.
Can I keep going?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So that's after Hicksville. This is what I was getting to next. This, remember the testimony about Mr. Depp being drunk on his yacht on the island in the Bahamas in 2013, when Mr. Depp looked a little scary by the way his body fell into the water, and Lily Rose, his daughter, started to cry. Miss Heard comforted Lily Rose, and then Depp accused Amber of making them aware of this, that he was drinking again, making his kids aware of this. And he slammed her up against the side wall of the bedroom, held her up by her neck, held her there for a second, and said, I can fucking kill you, and you're an embarrassment. That's what he said. And then, do you remember what happened? Lily Rose and Amber helicoptered away from the island. And while Amber was in the helicopter with Lily Rose, Mr. Depp sends her this piece of poetry, calling her a lesbian camp counselor because she cared about his drinking, and just ridiculing her for trying to protect his daughter. Sickening. This text, let's fast forward a little bit to, actually before we talk about this is the Boston flight. Let's talk about the Moscow flight. The Moscow flight, when Mr. Depp and Amber, she said that was the one time she took ecstasy or MDMA with Mr. Depp, and she learned her lesson. When he hit her on the plane, when he threatened to break the flight attendant's wrist, and Miss Vasquez, again, just tried to tell you, oh, he always wore rings. Now, Miss Heard said almost all the time he did, or maybe sometimes when he didn't. And in the picture that she just showed you, PX 1248, you can take a look at that when you review the evidence. That's a picture taken in Moscow with no rings other than a wedding ring on his finger, or some kind of ring. He's wearing one ring on his finger. And so in Mr. Depp's world, they're going to try to come at you either way. They say, well, he was wearing rings, but it didn't leave a mark on your face. And then they show you a picture where he wasn't wearing rings during that trip. So that's what happened in Moscow. On September 2013, in London, Mr. Depp was filming with Paul Bettany. He missed a few days of work, going on a multi-day drug binge. And that's when he told Miss Heard that if she accepted an invitation and went to a concert with a friend that she was starring in a movie with, that the engagement would be off. Talk about coercive control that Don Hughes testified is abuse. That is abuse. And there's been a lot mentioned in this case by Mr. Depp about Miss Heard not wanting to leave. Miss Heard not wanting him to leave. Well, this is why she didn't want him to leave, because he goes off with his friends and he twists off, as he calls it, and goes on a multi-day bender. That's why she didn't want him to leave when he got spun up like that and she could see the monster coming. So let's fast forward to the Boston plane incident. Mr. Depp was jealous that she was filming a movie with James Franco. And Miss Heard testified that when she met him in Boston, she was on the plane, his car pulled up. She could guess by the way he was moving. She knew what was going to board that plane. And it wasn't Mr. Depp, the man. It was Mr. Depp, the monster. She said, I already know he's drunk. I already know he's using. And then when he got on the plane, he straight up started taunting her. He called her a go-getter and a slut. He started throwing things at her, ice cubes and utensils, and he slapped her face against the window when she was seated. And when she got up to move, how dare she, he kicked her in the back. She said, "I feel this boot in my back." And he continued to drink and eventually started howling like an animal, passed out in the bathroom. Let's play 221, please. That's Mr. Depp on the plane, but he expects you to believe him that he didn't have anything to drink on that plane except for maybe one thing of champagne. That's what he expects you to believe. He's talked about blackouts. These blackouts where he doesn't remember what happened. He blamed them only on opiates, but we know they happen throughout, where he doesn't remember what's happened. As you're weighing the evidence, as you're assessing whether Mr. Depp has borne his burden of proof, think to yourself, do you believe Amber's account of what happened on the plane, or do you believe that person's account that you just heard? But actually, you can look at his account from a few days later, May 30th, in which he told, again, Paul Bettany, he said, "Drank all night before I picked Amber up to fly to LA. No food for days, powders, half a bottle of whiskey, 1,000 Red Bulls and vodkas, pills, 2 bottles of champagne, and what do you get? An angry aggro engine in a fucking blackout, screaming obscenities and insulting any fuck who got near. I'm done. I'm admittedly too fucked in the head to spray my rage at the one I love. For little reason as well. I'm too old to be that guy, but pills are fine." And he expects you to believe that he's carried his burden of proof in showing that no abuse happened on that plane. You don't have to look at just that. You can look at this text to Patty Smith when he says, "When I was in NYC, they were brief visits, and I fucked and charged by horrific fights with Amber. I fucked up and drank and got shitty, was so disappointed in myself." You can look at his text to Miss Heard the next day, where he says, "Once again, I find myself in a place of shame and regret. Of course, I am sorry. I really don't know why or what happened." Well, no wonder. You heard the voice on the plane. Of course he doesn't know what happened. "But I will never do it again. My illness somehow crept up and grabbed me. I must get better. I love you and feel so bad for letting you down." And what his response has been throughout this trial to things like that is blaming Amber, saying he's just placating her. Is that carrying his burden of proof and showing that abuse hasn't happened even a single time? This is in the lead up to Australia. But before we get there, we can talk about January 25th in Tokyo at the premiere of Mordecai, where he did slam her up against the hallway wall, wailed on her, and he did get on her back in the closet. And what do they say? Look at her backless dress. She doesn't have any bruises. She testified herself that she was checking out pictures because she was concerned that there were. So now their theory is if there's no marks, it didn't happen. We all know that's not the case. February 2015, this is when they got married. The day they got married, you heard the testimony from Io Tillett Wright that where Mr. Depp told him, "I can now punch her anytime I want and no one can do anything about it." He'll say it's a joke he made on his wedding day. Then we fast forward to Australia, where Miss Heard is flying from London, where she's filming The Danish Girl, to see her new husband for the first time since their wedding. And these are excerpts from DX353, all but the bottom right one are in the days leading up to this, where he's on a drug-fueled bender. He's hanging out with Marilyn Manson. He's getting drugs from his assistants who are enablers. Again, there's a reason you didn't hear them testify in this trial. They're getting him drugs for days and days. And then the one on the bottom right, you'll remember you've seen a couple times. This is after he chopped his finger off, when he says, "Need more cocaine and ecstasy." So, and no one, Miss Heard was in touch with his assistants, but no one told her the hornet's nest that she was walking into. And we all know what happened in Australia. We all know that Mr. Depp, she gets there, he pulls out a bag of MDMA, and he took a handful. She didn't say he took 10 at a time. She did say he took 8 to 10 over the course of that period. The second day, Mr. Depp, who claims that Miss Heard refused to do a post-nup, calls Amber's domestic relations attorney, Michelle Mulrooney. You heard from her when he was drunk, and he fired her. And he told Amber for about the 25th time, she said, the only way out of this is death. I don't want a post-nup. And then she said she remembered him slamming up against the wall. And I won't go through, you remember her testimony from Australia. You remember her saying that he had her by the neck, squeezing her neck. You remember her saying that he threw her on the games table like a ping pong table. You remember seeing the pictures of that broken table. You remember her saying that at some point he had a broken bottle up against her face, and he told her that he'd carve up her face, that he was throwing bottles at her. He's throwing bottles one after another, and I could feel glass breaking behind me, and you've seen the evidence of that. And he was just over and over again smashing the phone into the wall, screaming at me as she watched it break into pieces. Now, she doesn't know how he lost his finger. She said that she saw him smash a phone to pieces, and you heard him get impeached the other day with his testimony from the UK, which was different from what he testified here, where he said he did smash a phone. And then they tried to put that picture in front of you with a desk phone and suggest that that was it. It's deception. They're trying to deceive you. And then you heard Ms. Heard testify that the next morning she found meat that he had left all over the house. But not before what happened before she went to bed that night. Where Ms. Heard testified, and I remember trying to get up, and I was slipping on the glass. I was wanting to move. I felt this pressure in my pubic bone. I remember just not wanting to move because I didn't know if it was broken. I didn't know if the bottle that he had inside me was broken. This is the next morning. This is what he wrote with the bloody stump of his finger. And there's been testimony about what happened to cut the finger off, but frankly, it's irrelevant to your deliberations here. Amber could have chopped it off with an axe, and it has nothing to do with whether or not Mr. Depp abused her. But we all know she didn't. We all know that his fingers weren't curled, and someone was standing with a half-gallon vodka bottle from about where that canopy is, and threw it, and it somehow managed to damage just the bottom of the finger and leave the nail fully intact. We all know that didn't happen. Mr. Depp knows it didn't happen. We'll see some evidence of that. But here, he writes about her ambition, starring Billy Bob and Easy Amber. We've talked about controlling, jealousy, talked about him not wanting her to act. Dawn Hughes testified how that is a form of intimate partner abuse. Here he's writing on the mirror again, and they try to blame her and say that she wrote "Call Carly Simon." She didn't write that. Who was the lunatic in the house? Who was writing everywhere? There's no evidence she wrote that. She testified she doesn't even know who Carly Simon was until she was told. This is some of the evidence. Mr. Depp told you a couple different stories the other day about the evidence on the right. He claimed that that was the handle of vodka between those two beer cans there. But then under cross-examination, he admitted it's not, that there's not enough glass on the floor, that there's no handle of vodka on the floor. But what there is in the picture on the right is evidence of when he was throwing bottles past Amber's head and breaking that plate glass window. More writing, more abuse on the right. Imagining having a painting area where you're drawing two canvases and you and your husband get in a fight, and while you are asleep that night, he takes the bloody stump of his finger and dips it in paint and destroys your paintings. Ladies and gentlemen, that's abuse. Good luck and be careful at the top. And this is a good chance to talk about Mr. Depp's controlling and jealous rage and his desire to control Amber's career. He didn't want her to act. As early as 2013, he tells his sister, "I don't need actress bullshit and her fucking ambition." He tells her in this recording,
If you look at the bigger picture, what is the
became irrational when you're doing movies. I become jealous and fucking crazy and weird, and we fight a lot more.
I become jealous when you're doing movies. I become irrational and fucking crazy and weird. Out of his own mouth. This is some of the notes of Dr. Blaustein, his therapist, called him self-destructive. Something about wait up to fight the devil. Jealous, and I know this is hard to read, but you can see jealous, you can see paranoia, fear, envy. He wanted to control her. He wanted to own her. He didn't want her to have any career. And then he says things like, I have other uses for your throat, which do not include injury. No one who hasn't previously grabbed someone by the throat would write, which do not include injury. But we all know how Mr. Depp thinks along these lines, because you saw these two texts the other day that he sat on the stand and denied writing. And I'm not going to read them to you again, because they are the most vulgar, vile writing you can imagine. He said, that's not my style. I wouldn't write like that. Of course he would, and he did. These are texts that he produced, that he gave to Amber and our team in this litigation, from him to his personal assistant, Stephen Duders. This is the way he thinks about women. This, not what you heard on the stand, that. It's disgusting. He admitted that he cut his finger off. This is evidence of him admitting to it to people other than Amber. I cut the top of my middle finger off. Says that to Dr. Kipper. Says it again to Dr. Kipper. The bottom one he says to Nurse Velati. I just chopped my finger off. But he does say it to Amber too. Remember, we played this one 4 times, and Mr. Depp denied that he was actually saying the day that I chopped my finger off. Let's hear it one more time.
I don't know.
I'm talking about Australia, the day that
Now
I
we're
chopped
talking
my
about
finger.
Australia. Okay.
The day that I chopped my finger off. So let's fast forward to March 23rd, 2015. After just a few weeks in Australia, Mr. Depp has a finger injury, no doubt about that. He comes home. He gets what they call a soft cast on it, which you heard his treating physician and our experts say it doesn't have sides on it, but it's a hard plaster cast over the top of his finger that can be wielded like a club. And they got in an argument when Miss Heard discovered that he was having an affair with a woman named Rochelle that had been going on before the wedding, after the wedding, and she confronted him about that. No surprise there, they got in a huge argument. At some point in the argument, he bolted up the stairs. Now, Travis McGivern claims that she threw a Red Bull can at him. She and Whitney Henriquez say that absolutely didn't happen. But even if you believe Mr. McGivern, at some point, Mr. Depp went up the stairs. He went to the fight. This is the man that claims he always wants to run, and this time he had his bodyguard with him. So he could have just walked out the door, but he runs up the stairs, and Miss Henriquez is standing on the precipice of the stairs, and Amber admitted that when she thought he was about to push her down the stairs, as he's grabbing at her and Amber with his free hand and trying to club them with the casted hand, that she said, I punched him square in the face. I punched him square in the face. And they showed you a picture of the shiner that she had, that Mr. Depp had. Miss Heard doesn't deny that. They're trying to say she's the abuser for defending herself and her sister from this animal who's running at them. This person that they claim couldn't possibly have done this because he had a hurt finger. Yet he could have done this. This is what Mr. McGivern said was rearranging her closet. I don't know what you all do when you rearrange your closets, but I hope it doesn't look like this. This is throwing a clothing rack down the stairs. This is knocking this over. This is what he did to rearrange her closet with his hurt finger that he couldn't possibly have hit Miss Heard with, they claim. That in and of itself, that destruction of property, even if he hadn't hit her that night, that's abuse. Imagine being married to someone and walking on eggshells so thick that you don't know if you set them off, if that's what's going to happen. That's abuse. And it's disgusting. But sometimes he would apologize. He'd say, I can't express how sorry I am for having stooped so low as to have spewed such vicious untruths for the sole purpose of hurting you. Grievous error, shameful. So he went in these cycles. She thought he could change for good. And when it was good, it was really good. But then sometimes things like December 15th came around, where she remembers him chasing her in the kitchen. She remembers him shoving her 2 or 3 times and sending her toppling over a Chase lounge and saying, do you really want to go again, tough guy? And she looked at him and he balled up his fist, leaned back, and headbutted her square in the nose and pounded her head with the back of his fist so she couldn't breathe on that bed that we're going to see in a second, where she was suffocating in this pillow top, and she said, "This is when I thought I was going to die. He's going to kill me, and he doesn't even know what he's doing because he's out of his mind." And these are the pictures that they claim. I don't know what they're claiming. I don't know if they're claiming she painted on the bruise. Oh, you weren't hurt badly enough, so therefore you're making it up? Look under her eye. And again, their theory is that all of this is a lie. All of this was some grand hoax. If this were a hoax, ladies and gentlemen, she'd have worse injuries than that. She'd really do it up. She took pictures as they existed when she could at the time of abuse. And yet Ms. Vasquez has the nerve to say, well, why didn't she videotape an incident of abuse? What, if she's being hit, she's supposed to somehow grab a video camera with one hand while she's defending herself with another hand? You heard her in one of the audio tapes talking about when she hit him as he was trying to barge at her and she got her feet caught under a door as he's coming after her. And of course, as Don Hughes testified to, victims of coercive control like this, they do try to appease their abusive partner and apologize for things that aren't their fault. So as you're coming at me, Johnny, and you push a door into me, and I have to hit you to get away, to protect myself, yeah, she did apologize for that because that's the cycle of violence. That's what victims do. Yet they continue to blame the victim. There's no evidence she painted on that bloody lip. And again, if we're talking about a hoax, the next day she went on James Corden and they say, well, you can't see any injury there, so it must not have happened. She would have to be the dumbest person in the world to say, I'm going to commit an abuse hoax, but let's do it the day before I go on national television. Let's do it the day before. But you heard Melanie Iglesias, her makeup artist, testify in great detail, and I didn't even understand half the terms about makeup that she was using, but she testified in great detail about exactly what she did to cover up those bruises. The red lipstick that she put to cover up the busted lip. You heard the testimony of that from a neutral party who said exactly what she did. She talked about how she looked at the color wheel to neutralize the bruising. They claim it was just an accidental headbutt. Well, no accidental headbutt rips out hair. They claim, oh, Miss Heard somehow used a pocket knife to cut this portion of the bed out to stage this. Well, I don't know if that's a pocket knife or not, but the only testimony in this trial about a pocket knife is Whitney Henriquez saying that Mr. Depp carried a pocket knife in his pocket every day. We all know where that, if it is a pocket knife, where that came from. I think one of the most telling things about this incident is the text he sent to David Heard, Amber's dad, 2 weeks later, where he says, I meant to send this to you a week or so ago. I'm sending it to you now. And he says, I forget if it's a text or an email, but you can look at the X580. He says, yes, I fucked up and went too far in our fight. Because as a result of that fight and the bruises that all of her family saw, the family refused to go to the Bahamas with them for Christmas. The family refused to go to the Bahamas for Christmas, and on that trip to the island, Mr. Depp kept passing out, and every time he passed out, he would dump a glass of wine on Amber's lap. And she didn't like that, and she yelled at him. And because it was in front of his kids, he got up. This is the one where Tara Roberts took the video, but she didn't show you the closet, she didn't show you the bathroom. And Amber says, while holding my neck, this is in the closet, he said, I'll fucking kill you if you ever speak to me like that in front of my kids again because you embarrass me. And then he took her into the bathroom, and she said, but this time, he grabbed my vagina, shoved his fingers inside me, but through my bathing suit, and held me there and asked me if I was so fucking tough. And then she ran out of the house. And to keep him away from her, that's when he claims, and she admits she threw something at him. She didn't know what it was. It's been testimony it was a can of mineral spirits that she claimed that hit Mr. Depp. And Mr. Depp is somehow the victim in that encounter? Come on. We talk about the train ride to Asia. You saw the pictures taken before they got on the train ride where Mr. Depp has the same shadowing under his eye that he does in the allegedly abusive picture. But in that picture, he held in that train ride, talk about a honeymoon, he held her up against the wall while she was trying to get his arms off her neck, and he was squeezing her neck against the railway car, and at some point, I pulled the lapel of his shirt, he rips the shirt off, and she woke up with the shirt around her neck and a giant knot in the back of her head. Let's fast forward to her birthday party just very quickly. He experienced terrible financial news that night. He came over, they got into a fight. There's been conflicting evidence about that. But Amber said, I hit the side of the desk, he chest bumped me, he fell to the floor, I fell to the floor, and when I got back up, he held me down by the shoulders, and that's when he grabbed her by the pubic bone and pushed her down. And you'll remember Ms. Vasquez showing her her interrogatory answers where she details a lot of this and saying, nowhere in there does it say that. And Ms. Hurd says it actually does on page 64, and pointed out to Ms. Vasquez exactly where it says that. That's abuse. It's sexual abuse. But we all know what Mr. Depp does when he experiences terrible financial news, or terrible news. He experienced terrible news that night on the way to the birthday party where both of his bodyguards have testified that he was either visiting his sick mom or getting a birthday present for Amber. And then we know what happens the day after his mother passed away on May 21st, 2016. And we're going to skip through a little bit of this now. And Elaine will talk about this in the context of the counterclaim. But these are the pictures afterwards. These are pictures that now they're claiming that, they must have been faked. There's been no testimony in this case that these pictures were faked. There's been no testimony that the marks you see on Amber's face, including this mark with a straight line from below her eye to the top of her temple that it lines up directly with a phone. There's been no testimony that those are faked. Mr. Depp went through the house. He destroyed pictures of her friends. That's abuse. Property destruction like that, in and of itself, is abuse. He destroyed her office. He destroyed her friend Rocky Pennington's preparation for the bead show that she was having. He spilled wine in the hallway that you'll notice the police denied. Oh, there was no spilled wine in the hallway. Well, even Isaac Baruch testified that he saw this in the hallway. And they said she never sent anything to her medical providers. These are the texts that she sent to her nurse, Erin Filati, the night that it happened. These are pictures of her in the courtroom. We're not going to play this right now, but you can listen to this. This is that terribly disturbing text of him in July of 2016 threatening to cut himself and telling, you cut me or I will. You all remember playing that. It was awful. It was awful. I'm not going to play it again, but it was horrible. That in and of itself is abusive. This is the document that Mr. Depp signed, the divorce agreement, where he says, signed in agreement with his signature, neither party has made false accusations for financial gain. He said that then. He could have fought this then, but he didn't because he knew that her allegations were true. But then he continued his campaign of humiliation. He says, I want her replaced on that WB film. Ladies and gentlemen, the facts are absolutely overwhelming of abuse. One time. That's all you have to remember. Mr. Depp simply cannot prove to you that he never once abused Amber. And if you don't know, you have to return a verdict for Ms. Hurd. A ruling against Amber here sends a message that no matter what you do as an abuse victim, you always have to do more. No matter what you document, you always have to document more. No matter whom you tell, you always have to tell more people. No matter how honest you are about your own imperfections and your own shortcomings in a relationship, you need to be perfect in order for people to believe you. Don't send that message. That's what he wants you to send. So I'm going to quickly get to another point that you have to find in order to prove or in order to rule for Mr. Depp. You would have to find that Ms. Hurd made the statements with actual malice. Now, what Mr. Chu didn't tell you is that you have to find this by clear and convincing evidence. So this is much higher than the greater weight of the evidence standard that applies to the other claims, the other elements of the claim. Clear and convincing evidence is evidence that creates in your minds a firm belief or conviction that Mr. Depp has proved this issue. So if you believe that Ms. Hurd did not act maliciously in writing her op-ed, then you must return a verdict for Ms. Hurd, even if you think that he never abused her. But I'll quickly go over the evidence of this. The op-ed, you look at the words, it clearly wasn't a hit piece. She visited her attorney, Eric George, who testified by video that his objective was to make sure that there could be no meritorious claim that could be brought about this article relating to defamation. He gave Ms. Hurd advice. She affirmatively followed all of it. So you cannot find that Ms. Hurd met the clear and convincing evidence standard, given the testimony of Eric George, given the testimony of Terrence Doherty from the ACLU, when Amber went out of her way to ask her lawyer if it was okay. They will say it doesn't matter if she's lying, but even if that isn't They will say that that doesn't matter if she's lying, but even that isn't true. Because again, keep in mind that if Ms. Heard wanted to be malicious toward Mr. Depp, the article would be very different. And I think it's interesting here, we'll talk about Mr. Waldman in a second, but that Amber utilized her attorney, Eric George, to make sure that she was following the law. Mr. Depp used his attorney, Adam Waldman, as an attack dog to defame Amber and to fulfill Depp's promise to her of global humiliation. The last thing I'll touch on before Elaine talks is Mr. Depp's damages. The man's at least consistent in one respect. He blames other people for his problems, everyone but himself. You heard us reading the stack of articles dating years before he broke up with Amber, before their marriage broke apart, talking about his problems, talking about the fact that his movies were flops, talking about the fact that he was late to the set, that he's unreliable as an actor. A word of reminder here, ladies and gentlemen, is that the only thing Amber ever did that Mr. Depp is allowed to sue her for is the op-ed. He's trying to say, I want to sue her for what she said in 2016. I want to sue her for harm that was caused then. You cannot do that. The only thing you're being asked to decide are the words of the op-ed defamatory. Nothing else. Any damage to Mr. Depp's career is self-caused. Then think about the testimony that you've heard from his former business manager, Joel Mandel, said that Depp had issues with drugs and alcohol that damaged his career. Depp sued him. His former agent, Tracy Jacobs, said he was late to the set and that he used an earpiece. Depp fired her. She said Disney never committed to Pirates 6. Disney's corporate representative, Tina Newman, said that there was no record in Disney's records of this op-ed. This op-ed had nothing to do with it. In fact, Catherine Arnold, our damages expert, testified that the paper version of the article that allegedly they say came out 4 days after the op-ed was published the same day as the op-ed that said that Johnny might not be in Pirate 6. The same day. The paper article came out the same day. So the op-ed didn't cause that. There's no evidence of any contract by Disney for Pirate 6. His agent, Jack Wiggum, couldn't identify a contract. His former agent, Christian Carino, said that there's no contract. He didn't lose anything as a result of this op-ed. Anything he's lost is the result of his own choices. You also heard him lie to you. You heard him tell you that this was his first chance to tell his story. But let's break it down because that's not true. He could have fought the TRO that Amber filed. He could have said, I didn't abuse her, but he chose not to do that. He could have fought her in the divorce case, but he chose not to do that. Instead, he signed the statement saying that no one had falsified any statements. He only filed this suit after he met Adam Waldman, the same Adam Waldman who convinced him to file suit against his former business manager, to file suit against his law firm, and fire them, and blame them for things. But by the time that Amber wrote the op-ed, Mr. Depp already had another opportunity to tell his story. He filed a case in the UK against the Sun for calling him a wife beater. And in that case, he had many of the same witnesses. He was on the stand for parts of 5 days, and he got to tell the fact finder in the UK whatever he wanted. Now, it's not the same testimony he told here, because you heard me impeach him about 13 times with his testimony from the UK. But he's had his chances. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to tell Mr. Depp that this was his last chance. Tell him to move on with his life. Tell him to let Amber move on with hers. Stand up for the freedom of speech. Stand up for the First Amendment. This trial is about so much more than Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. It's about the freedom of speech. Stand up for it, protect it, and reject Mr. Depp's claims against Amber. And now you'll hear from Ms. Beretta Hawk about the counterclaim. Thank you.
Yep. I'm good. Good. I get to say good afternoon. And I know you've been listening to everybody for a long time here, and I echo Ben's very strong thank you to all of you for this extreme service and extraordinary service. We really appreciate it. I'm going to go really fast and try to go as quick as I can so that you can get a break from us and go make your decision. I know you're probably itching to do it at this point. But this is very important to us, and we appreciate your listening, and we appreciate your being here. I'm going to stay on this slide for a moment, and there's something that's very important on this slide that hasn't been brought to your attention by Mr. Depp's team. When you see the actual damages, go down to the last paragraph, if you will. It says, Mr. Depp cannot recover damages for any harm that occurred after November 2, 2020. Do you all see that? So what Mr. Depp's team got up here and told you through Mr. Chu this morning has nothing to do with this case. He had his chance in the UK. The lawsuit was filed June 2018, 6 months before the op-ed. The trial was July 2020. The process ended, according to Mr. Marks, their expert, on November 2, 2020. And his damages stopped then. He can't get reputational damages. He can't get his legacy back for his children. He can't get anything after that day from you. You can't restore his reputation. You can't give him anything. They didn't tell you that, but the court told you that. And that's a very, very important thing here. He told his story. He had his opportunities. He had his full opportunities to do all of that. And he came in here and lied to you and said he's here to get his reputation back. It's just one of many lies in this case, but it's a really big one, because here we are, 6 weeks of your time, precious time, 6 weeks of this court's time, for what? For nothing. Only to go after Amber. That's psychological abuse. He's going after Amber for nothing because he wants to put her through this again, the third time. So we're fighting back, and that's the counterclaim. She finally has said enough, enough. And we're asking you to finally hold this man responsible. He has never accepted responsibility for anything in his life. You've heard it this whole time. He hasn't admitted to anything. He's blamed everybody in the world, his agent, his manager, his lawyer, Amber, his friends, everybody. But he's never accepted responsibility for a thing he's done in his life. But we're asking you to accept, to make him accept responsibility, to hold him legally responsible for his actions, and to fully and fairly compensate Amber for what he has done by creating this concept of a hoax for the defamation that he has committed, that you have heard so much about, that just took wildfire and went off into negative media and has made Amber's life pure hell up to this day. We're asking you to do that, to compensate her, to be fair and hold him responsible so he stops. We don't want another lawsuit. We don't want anything else. We want to leave Amber alone and let her get on with her life and raise her child. So let's talk about the counterclaim for a moment. These are Adam Waldman statements. You've heard Mr. Depp say, well, why aren't you suing Mr. Waldman? Isn't that typical of Mr. Depp? He doesn't take responsibility for anything, so now he's going to blame his lawyer. But the evidence is very clear on all three statements, and we'll show them to you in a minute, that he says Adam Waldman, Mr. Depp's attorney, says these things. Now, Mr. Depp says, oh, I didn't even know about those until the counterclaim. Well, we know that's not true because Mr. Waldman's testimony was 2 months before those statements were made. In February of 2020, Mr. Depp accompanied Mr. Waldman to the Daily Mail, the same place that all three of these statements were published. And he gave him 2 spliced audio tapes to try to make it look like Amber was the person who was committing the abuse. He went with him. He knew that Mr. Waldman was doing this. He knew that Mr. Waldman was launching a campaign against Amber to try to discredit her. And he went with him. He knew that Mr. Waldman was doing this. He knew that Mr. Waldman was launching a campaign against Amber to try to discredit her. And the timing of this, we're talking, the statements now are April and June of 2020. The trial is July of 2020. So they're launching an attack to try to discredit Amber before the trial in the UK. That's what happened here. And that is Mr. Waldman, but it's Mr. Depp. The judge gave you 3 different instructions, and you'll all have them. He's acting as his attorney. He has the authority. So Mr. Depp is standing in the shoes of Mr. Waldman. Mr. Waldman is standing in the shoes of Mr. Depp. Michelle, can you please bring up the first statement? It says, Amber and her friends in the media use fake sexual violence allegations as both a sword and shield, depending on their needs. They have selected some of her sexual violence hoax facts as the sword, inflicting them on the public and Mr. Depp. Now, what this statement is meant to imply is that Amber is lying about the sexual assaults and using them with the media to try to discredit Mr. Depp. That's the clear implications of this. Now, the first part of this is this contradicts Mr. Depp's claims today that the first time you ever heard about the sexual assaults that happened was in this case. It was in the UK case. This is the case that Mr. Depp brought in the UK. And instead of Amber Heard trying to put this out in the media, she did exactly the opposite. Now, this article's not in your evidence book. At least some of you will remember it being shown at one point with the title that said that Amber was successful in being able to treat her allegations of the sexual violence confidential in that proceeding. And it was treated confidential. She did exactly the opposite. She didn't want to tell people this. And you know that. You watched her on the stand. It was heart-rending for her to have to do this with the cameras, no less. But what else is false about this statement? It's that there was no false statements of sexual violence. Ben went through all 4 of them, and I will not repeat them all. You heard the testimony, and interestingly enough, you didn't hear any stories that differed from that with Mr. Depp. He didn't get on the stand and say, no, this didn't happen, to at least a couple of them. And he can't in Australia. He can't remember anything, likely. But if you just look at the pictures of the destruction in that house, I mean, imagine painting those canvases and how long that took and how much hatred and rage you have to have for somebody to do something like that. Writing on the walls, tearing up her nightgown and wrapping pieces of raw steak and putting it all over the house. Remember that she also testified that he took her clothes and swiped them through all the paint before she left. These things happened. With respect to the malice on this one, he knows that he did these things. You know that he knows he was out of it for 3 days. And that's all that we need to prove for malice. But there's a couple of more facts here. But you can find whatever Mr. Waldman's done, and you can find whatever Mr. Depp has done. And both of those are the same for purposes of evaluating the verdict form. They stand in each other's shoes. When you have an agent, and that's what the jury instructions say, you can go with both. What did Mr. Waldman do? There was an article about the sexual violence that he had put from the April one that went into the trial. Amber's testimony, she was sitting near him in the trial. Adam Waldman threw that newspaper down in front of her defiantly. That's actually us. confirmed that he had reviewed Bonnie Jacobs' notes as well. And when I asked Dr. Curry, she said she had reviewed them, but she had no comment, but she also didn't deny that those were in there. Amber Heard testified that she went back, and because of Bonnie Jacobs' notes, she realized for the first time that the abuse started much earlier than she even realized before. She always had thought that it had started in 2013. When she went back and saw Bonnie Jacobs' notes, she realized that it had started much earlier, and she was very embarrassed by that. Now, significantly, you remember that she testified about how she was first called upon to actually detail all of her events of abuse in February of this year. And she went through and took the notes, took photos, she took everything she had, calendars, everything, put it all together, and you heard about at least 64 pages of detailed accountability of that. And Mr. Depp's team has been able to not refute any of that. And remember, they tried to impeach her and say, well, you didn't say that. She said, yes, I did, on page 64. Remember that? It was a very, very difficult process for her because there was an awful lot of it, and she put it in great detail. Now, let's talk for a moment about the motive. They have said that she has created this whole hoax, and I think Ben's done a nice job of showing how that can't possibly have been. But what would Amber Heard's motive be for creating a hoax, or creating any of this, or making any of this up? That's a big question here. They call her a gold digger, right? But she obviously couldn't have done it for the money, because first of all, remember the testimony of Laura Wasser, the divorce attorney. She said that California is a no-fault state and community property. So Amber doesn't have to have an abuse. She could have divorced him for irreconcilable differences.
Cactus seems to be like my chosen kind of form of
for anything.
Yeah,
She
things
doesn't
to do.
need an excuse, and she gets 50% of whatever he earns during the time of the marriage, unless they had a prenup or a postnup. The testimony from Michelle Mulrooney was that Amber completely cooperated with the prenup and the postnup, but it was Johnny Depp who, and you already heard from Ben, called her up and fired her. He didn't want a postnup or a prenup. So she's entitled to 50% of everything he earns during that time. Now, we have Plaintiff's Exhibit 936 in evidence, and look at page 69. It says how much he made in 2015. It was $43 million. Remember Mr. Spindler, Depp's expert, who said that he made $22 million in 2016. So you got $65 million. Amber was entitled to 31.5 at least. That doesn't include all the back ends from, for example, Pirates 5. She was entitled to that money. So she didn't need to say anything. She could have just said, I don't like you anymore. I don't like the color of your hair. I'm going to divorce you.
Your
She
Honor,
would have been
we're
entitled
going
to
to
that.
object again.
So if you do the math, Amber is entitled to at least 31.5. What does she take? $7 million. What does she do with the $7 million? She gives it to charity, or she intends to give it to charity. Now, they make much ado about the pledge versus donation, but both the corporate designees for ACLU and for Children's Hospital said donation and pledge are interchangeable. You know, these are pledges. The ACLU corporate designee said you typically do pledges because of the tax benefits, and that's what she said. She pledged it over a period of time because of the tax implications to it and because she was getting paid over the time. Now, she started to make these donations, and you'll see that the first one was on behalf of Mr. Depp's business manager, Mr. White, actually sent the letters with the $100,000 for each of those. That was the initial ones. He was trying to take credit for those, and in fact, both the ACLU and Children's Hospital got confused and gave the credit to Mr. Depp, not to Amber, for those. Then she made payments to both, and Elon Musk also made payments to both for $500,000 each, which she didn't count to her pledge, but they helped those organizations. At the end of the day, she's made $1 million in payments to them, but then she got sued here and hasn't been able to because she spent $6 million in attorney's fees. That is unrefuted. She still intends to pay those pledges, honor those pledges, and she said that throughout, and I elicited from both the ACLU and from Children's Hospital, they haven't expired, she can pay them whenever she wants to, and she fully intends to, but she has to get out from under this first. Now, who would blame a woman for giving $1 million in charitable donations? Who would do that? That sounds like psychological abuse to me. Now, Mr. Mandel testified that Johnny Depp is not a charitable person, and he hasn't written any big checks for him. Mr. Depp got on the stand and says he does it anonymously, but Mr. Mandel would have been the one writing the checks, and he says that didn't happen. Now let's go to damages, because I promised you I was going to go pretty fast here. There's a few different types of damages, but one of the things that the court has talked to you about, she told you that because we have defamation, it's invidious, and therefore it's very difficult to prove these. And so these damages to business reputation, inconvenience, embarrassment are presumed. You don't have to prove those damages. And one great example of that is the testimony from Mr. Hamada at Warner Brothers. He didn't want to have to get in the middle of all of this with Aquaman 2. They haven't even released it. So he didn't read anything in preparation for his deposition. He didn't talk to anybody before his deposition. He said that he tried to do technicals and say, no, we never terminated her contract. But, oh, yeah, we did tell her we were probably not going to renew her option. And then we didn't change the script, but Amber got the script, and yes, they did change it. Then he said, no, we never negotiate salaries, but oh yeah, we did renegotiate Jason Momoa's and Gal Gadot's. So he just doesn't want to admit to any of these things. But what came out in Hamada's deposition, and I hope you were listening carefully to this, was the email from James Wan, the director, and Jason Momoa, her co-star, who said they guarantee if they are in the film, she is going to be Mara in the film. Why would they do that unless they thought Warner Brothers was being unfair to her? And why did she get almost knocked out of it? Because of the defamatory statements. When they came out, they took on a life of their own. Ron Schnell, the young Sheldon, I call him, or the Doogie Howser, our expert on IT, took you through and tracked how they tracked the defamatory statements, the language from the defamatory statements, how that went through the social media and the negative social media. And it kept going and kept going. And he tracked all the way until a few months ago over 2.36 million negative tweets, negative Instagrams, negative social media's comments about Amber that relate specifically to the information that was in those 3 defamatory statements. It took on a life of its own. They started to get Amber fired from Aquaman 2. They have continued to this day. They have followed her everywhere. Everybody has stopped wanting her. L'Oreal won't use her, even though they've kept her on from that time. She lost 3 different opportunities that were being discussed with her. The most significant part of that, though, is that Aquaman was the biggest blockbuster ever for DC Films. It was the biggest. It was over $1 billion. This was her opportunity for her star. Even the experts from Mr. Depp admitted this was her blockbuster, this was her mega. But what happened instead? As she's going through, as it's coming out, and in that 16 months they were going, well, nothing happened. Yeah, lots happened. She had 3 different films she was discussing. She got the L'Oreal contract. She got The Stand. All of those things were happening because of Aquaman. And then everything shut down. She wasn't allowed to do publicity for The Stand. She wasn't allowed to, she hasn't been allowed to do anything for L'Oreal. She got shut down from her charitable organizations. She ended up not getting the Amazon movie. And then they gave her a hard time about Aquaman 2. And instead of the career trajectory of the other comparators, who all went way up, and by the way, all the experts admit that career trajectory went well for all the rest of them, and she's the only one that didn't have it.